Welcome to TechDaily.AI, your source for technical information. This podcast is sponsored by Stonefly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery, hyper-converged in VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster, AI servers, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com for more information. Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at something pretty interesting today. It's a recently found method, kind of sneaky, that attackers are using. They're basically staying inside network security devices, Fortinet ones, even after they've been patched.
Yes, quite the persistence technique.
Right, so it's not just getting in once, it's about sticking around.
Exactly. They're planting something that lets them potentially slip back in later. We're seeing this with FortiGate firewalls, the next-gen ones specifically.
Okay, FortiGate. And the core of this trick, it seems to involve something called symbolic links.
That's right, symbolic links or symlinks.
Now, for maybe not everyone knows, what is that exactly, in simple terms?
Think of it like a shortcut or maybe a signpost. Something on the device's system that just points somewhere else.
Okay, a pointer.
Yeah. And the operating system, when it sees this signpost, it just automatically follows it to where it points.
Gotcha. So it redirects things.
Precisely. And the clever part here is where the attackers are putting these things.
Where are they putting them?
Well, not so more obvious. They're linking a, let's say, less sensitive user area to the main root file system.
Okay.
Specifically, it seems to be happening in a folder that's normally used for language files for the SSL VPN feature.
Ah, okay, so tucked away a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which makes them harder to spot.
And this is where it gets kind of worrying, isn't it? Because you might update your system.
Right. You apply the patch for the vulnerability they used to get in initially.
But this little shortcut, this symlink, it could still be sitting there.
It could. Potentially giving the attackers continued access. Now, it seems to be read-only access in this state.
Read only. Okay, so they can't change things directly through this link.
Doesn't seem like it, based on what we know. But even read-only access to sensitive files, like configuration files, that's still really valuable for an attacker.
How so? What could they do with just read access?
Well, reconnaissance, mainly. They can learn the system layout, see the configurations, maybe find passwords or keys stored insecurely. They can map out your defenses, basically, look for other weaknesses. It's like giving them the blueprints.
Without you even knowing they have them. That's concerning. Is this just a few isolated cases, or are we seeing this more broadly?
The report suggests it's potentially quite widespread. The Shadow Server Foundation, they do a lot of scanning.
Right, I know them.
They've identified thousands of devices globally that might have these malicious links.
Thousands, wow. Where are they seeing the most?
Well, they noted significant numbers in the U.S., Taiwan, China, Japan, France, but really it's a global issue.
So you could patch, think you're safe, but this backdoor is potentially still open?
Potentially, yes. It really highlights this trend we're seeing. You know, attackers aren't just hitting and running. They want persistence.
They're digging in for the long haul.
Exactly right. Trying to set up ways to survive, patching, upgrades, maybe even a factory reset in some scenarios, though that's less clear here. They want to maintain that foothold.
And these network edge devices like firewalls, they seem to be popular targets for this sort of thing, right? Why them?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. They're the gatekeepers. They sit right on the edge of your network.
Controlling traffic in and out.
Precisely. So compromising them gives attackers a huge advantage. Plus, historically, these kinds of devices, well, sometimes patching them isn't as fast as it should be.
Yeah, managing fleets of appliances can be tough.
And they've unfortunately had their share of pretty serious vulnerabilities over the years. So, you know, nation-state actors, sophisticated groups, they see these edge devices as prime real estate.
Okay, so these symbolic links, they aren't the entry method usually. They're used after a compromise.
Generally, yes. They're using this in conjunction with exploiting actual software vulnerabilities to get initial access.
Which vulnerabilities are being used here?
There are a few specific ones linked to this campaign. CVE 2022-42475, that's one.
Okay.
And CVE 2023-27997. Both of those are heat-based buffer overflows in the FortiOS SSL VPN. Basically, ways to potentially run code by sending too much data.
Right, classic overflow issues.
And there's also CVE 2024-21772 mentioned, which is an out-of-bounds write flaw. Similar concept, manipulating memory to gain control.
And is there a catch? Like, does something specific need to be enabled for this whole chain to work?
Yes, that's a really crucial point. The SSL VPN feature, it has to be enabled on the FortiGate device.
So if you're not using SSL VPN,
This particular attack vector, using the symlink planted via the SSL VPN language directory, is likely not going to work against you, at least not in the way described here.
okay, that's important context. So for listeners running these FortiGate devices, what's the immediate advice? What should they be doing right now?
Number one priority, .patch. Update FortiOS immediately. The vendor, Fortinet, has released specific versions that fix the underlying vulnerabilities and deal with these symlinks.
Which versions are those? Do we know?
Yes, the advisories mention versions like 7.6.2, 7.4.7, 7.2.11, 7.0.17, and 6.4.16 or later within those branches. You definitely need to check the specific advisory for your device model and current version.
Okay, so update. What if you can't update immediately?
Well, the other recommendation, if feasible for your operations, is to disable the SSL VPN feature entirely, at least as a temporary workaround until you can patch.
Disable SSL VPN. That might be disruptive for some orgs, though.
It absolutely could be. It depends heavily on whether they rely on it for remote access, but it does mitigate this specific threat chain.
But you said earlier patching might not be enough if you were already compromised before patching.
That's the really tricky part, isn't it? If an attacker got in using one of those CVEs before you patched, they could have planted the symbolic link then.
And the patch might fix the CVE, but not necessarily remove the existing link, although later patches might.
Exactly. The initial patches might not have cleaned up existing links. Fortinet says newer updates do include logic to detect and remove known malicious symlinks.
Okay, that's good.
But the strong advice from security researchers, and CISA chimed in too, is to treat any device suspected of being compromised before patching with caution.
What does caution mean in practice? Factory reset.
It could mean investigating logs very carefully, reviewing configurations for any anomalies, definitely resetting credentials, admin passwords, VPN secrets, API keys, anything sensitive on that box. A factory reset and rebuild might be the safest option if compromise is strongly suspected.
Right, better safe than sorry. It just hammers home how fast you need to be with patching these critical vulnerabilities.
It really does. The time between a vulnerability being disclosed and attackers exploiting it, sometimes it's just days or even hours. They're incredibly fast.
So are the vendors doing anything more sort of proactively beyond patching the specific holes?
Yes, thankfully. Fortinet mentioned that the newer FortiOS updates don't just remove existing bad links, but also prevent new ones being created via the SSL VPN interface in this way.
Okay, closing that specific manipulation vector?
Right. And they're also highlighting broader security posture improvements, things like virtual patching capabilities in some products, auto-update options, firmware validation checks, trying to build more layers of defense.
Good to hear they're adding more safeguards.
Definitely needed.
So let's try and wrap this up. What's the absolute key takeaway for everyone listening?
Okay, the main thing is attackers are using these hidden symbolic links on compromised Fortinet devices. These links let them maintain read-only access, potentially grabbing config data, even after you've applied security patches for the initial entry point.
And this isn't theoretical, it's happening widely.
Yes, thousands of devices might be affected globally. It shows how attackers are really focused on persistence now.
Digging in.
Right. And the way they create the link, hidden in that SSL VPN language folder connecting to the root system, makes it hard to spot.
It relies on specific vulnerabilities being exploited first.
Correct, like CVE 2022-42475, CVE 2023-27997, CVE 2024-21762.
And requires SSL VPN to be turned on.
Crucially, yes.
Yeah.
So the immediate actions are update to the latest recommended FortiOS versions now. Consider disabling SSL VPN temporarily if you can't patch right away.
And crucially, if you patched after these attacks started happening.
You still need to investigate.
Yeah.
Check configs, reset credentials, treat that device as potentially compromised until you're sure it's clean. Remember, edge devices are hot targets. Patch fast.
That's a fantastic summary. It really lays out the threat and the necessary actions, and it leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? If attackers can find ways like this to persist, even after we apply patches, what other hidden mechanisms might be out there? In our firewalls, our routers, all sorts of infrastructure, how can we ever be truly sure we've cleaned up completely after an incident? It's definitely something to think about. A sobering challenge.